The siren screamed before the HOA representative could even knock on the door. Linda Calhoun had seen a lot in her 12 years as the president of the Roseview Homeowners Association. Unauthorized treehouses, suspiciously purple garden fences, even a makeshift alpaca pen someone tried to pass off as eco-grazing. But nothing prepared her for the cacophony that ripped through the air just as she stepped onto the front walkway of 847 Windmere Lane. She flinched, nearly dropping her clipboard, as the distant wail of emergency sirens swelled into a full-throated howl, birds scattered from the hedges. A neighbor's car alarm went off 3 houses down. It was the kind of noise that made your heart leap before your brain even had time to ask why. "Do they always have to be this dramatic?" mumbled Donnie Myers, one of the HOA board members trailing a few feet behind her. His usual smirk was replaced by a wrinkle of genuine concern. "They probably just forgot to move their trash bins." Linda muttered back, trying to steady her voice. "Let's just do the inspection." It had started like any other Thursday. Linda had brewed her coffee, reviewed her inspection notes, and rallied her 2 most reliable board members, Donnie and Cheryl, to join her on a surprise landscape audit of select properties in the neighborhood. She even made extra copies of the HOA's landscaping compliance forms, which she kept tucked neatly into her leather folder. This was her moment: order, uniformity, aesthetics. These were her principles. But something was wrong. As they approached, the house, a strange, shimmering haze, danced in the air near the hedges. The lawn looked freshly mowed, but wisps of heat visibly distorted the space above it. The usually pristine flower beds flanking the walkway were ringed with something shiny, almost metallic. A faint chemical tang stung the air. It was subtle, but it didn't belong. She reached the porch and hesitated before pressing the doorbell. A shout cut through the air, sharp, urgent. "Drop! Drop! Now!" Linda's heart slammed against her chest. She turned just in time to see 2 figures in full fire-resistant suits barreling out from the backyard. They were hauling what looked like an enormous snake, a thick fire hose that writhed and slapped against the grass. One of them was already twisting a valve. The other held a nozzle like it was a weapon, bracing as water exploded from it in a thunderous surge. And then she saw it. Flames. Actual flames. Not from a grill, not from a fire pit, from the side of the house. Orange tongues flicked upward, licking the wall like they had business there. Smoke unfurled in long, greedy ribbons, curling over the roof like it had been waiting for an invitation. Back. "Get back!" someone screamed. Linda stumbled down the steps, nearly twisting her ankle. Cheryl let out a noise halfway between a gasp and a scream and darted toward the curb. Donnie just froze, eyes wide, clipboard dangling from his fingers. They should have left then. Normal people might have. But Linda wasn't normal when it came to HOA protocol. She was rigid. She was committed. She was, in her own words, principled to a fault. Even as smoke stung her eyes and panic scratched at her lungs, her instinct screamed, "Something is wrong, but we need to document this." She fumbled for her phone, ready to snap a photo for the violation report, when the front door banged open. Out stepped a man, maybe in his early 30s, shirtless except for a bright orange safety vest hanging open over a t-shirt that said, "Controlled Chaos Landscaping." His expression wasn't panicked. He wasn't even sweating. In fact, he looked mildly annoyed, like he'd just been interrupted during a particularly good sandwich. "Oh?" he said, blinking at them like they were Girl Scouts selling cookies, instead of neighborhood bureaucrats. "Hey, you must be the HOA folks. You're early." Linda gaped at him, smoke curling around her head like a villain's cape. "Early? What is this?" "This is a fire." He laughed, and pointed casually over his shoulder. "Live fire drill, full-scale test. We're coordinating with the county fire department. Got the permits, don't worry." Linda looked from him to the flames and back again, struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with what she was hearing. "You set fire to the house?" Cheryl shouted from a safe distance. Technically, it's just the fire-resistant landscaping. Buffer. New materials we're testing. Pyrophytic deterrents, fire-retardant mulch, thermogenic soil activators. It's cutting-edge stuff, he said proudly. Linda stared, mouth agape, as two firefighters sprayed a focused jet of foam onto a row of bushes that were somehow, miraculously, still green. "And the flames?" she asked. "The actual flames?" "Controlled. Burns," the man said, walking down the steps toward her with the casualness of someone describing his new toaster. "They're simulating a wildfire event. Helps us evaluate the containment performance of the yard's new safety perimeter. Plus, great PR for the company." "This is residential property," she snapped, finally finding her voice. This is a family neighborhood." "Exactly," he said, smiling. "Which is why people need to know what actually works when things go sideways. Besides, we submitted all the paperwork. You must have missed the memo." Linda's clipboard was now somewhere near the azaleas, but she didn't care. Her brain was still trying to process how a simple landscaping inspection had turned into an inferno-themed science fair. A firefighter ran past her, saluting the shirtless landscaper on his way to deploy another foam barrier near the garage. It was then that she noticed something bizarre. Despite the fire, the plants weren't burning. The fence wasn't charred. The lawn, though it rippled from the heat, wasn't scorched. This wasn't chaos. It was something much more unsettling. It was planned. It was orchestrated. It was a demonstration. Her eyes narrowed. She'd come looking for code violations. Instead, she'd walked into a firestorm with paperwork, and it was only 10:17 a.m. Linda's clipboard was gone. Possibly incinerated, possibly lying somewhere beneath the trampled petunias. Not that it mattered. No amount of paperwork could fix whatever this was. Smoke curled around her like a curtain, stinging her eyes, coating her throat. She turned in slow disbelief, watching the rest of her team scatter like startled deer. Cheryl had taken refuge behind a hydrangea bush near the curb, repeatedly shouting, "We are not trained for this," while flapping her inspection sheets, like they were white flags. Donnie had frozen mid-stride in the middle of the lawn, mouth half open, eyes wide, one foot resting on what was now clearly a fireproof mat hidden under fake turf. His pen dangled from his fingers, forgotten. The sound of water hammering against siding thundered through the yard, a cascade of foam and vapor spilling over the edge of the garage. The house didn't appear to be catching, at least not in the normal way. The siding shimmered but held. Flames reached up and licked at the frame like curious cats, but somehow everything stayed intact. The blaze danced inside some invisible boundaries, wild but seemingly choreographed. "What is happening?" Linda barked, voice raspy with smoke and disbelief. Her words were lost in the clamor of shouts and spray. Then came the man again, jogging over from the chaos. Still in those neon-orange cargo shorts, still wearing that relaxed, this-is-all-fine smile. If the fire reflected in his sunglasses bothered him, he didn't show it. "Hey, so just to clarify, this is all intentional," he said over the roar. "We're partnering with the county's Fire Prevention and Mitigation Division. I think they mentioned it in the community bulletin?" Linda blinked through the haze. "Bulletin? Bulletin? I read every word of every bulletin that goes out, and not once did I see anything about arson-themed landscaping trials." He chuckled. "Technically, it's combustion resistance testing. We're showcasing our new flame-retardant plantings and barrier technologies. It's cutting edge. Won a state grant last quarter." She stared at him, flabbergasted, unsure whether to scream or faint. He continued, unbothered, gesturing casually toward the madness behind him. "The county fire department's running drills today. They get to test their equipment in a realistic scenario. We get to show off how our fire-resistant landscaping materials hold up. Win-win." "This is a neighborhood," Linda said again, enunciating the word like it would restore order through sheer clarity. "There are children here. There are pets. There are roses." "Exactly why we're doing this," he said, as though she had proven his point. Look, we've got full coordination. I can show you the permits, fire marshal's signature, even got the homeowner's enthusiastic consent. Real pioneer, that guy. Wanted to see how well the new installations held up under pressure. You're burning his house, she gasped. Grinned. Around. The house. Big difference. A sudden whoosh behind him made them both turn. A nearby garden bed burst into flame, but instead of catching and spreading, it flared like a torch for just a moment before fizzling down into embers. A cloud of fine mist was already descending from a hidden sprinkler above the porch. "Oh yeah," the man said, nodding appreciatively. "Thermal-triggered suppression system. First real-time test. Works beautifully." Linda felt the ground tilt beneath her. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't even incompetence. This was intentional madness, bureaucratically approved, systematically executed, and somehow every inch of it had snuck under her radar. She tried to rally. You didn't give us proper notice. You can't just light yards on fire during our scheduled inspections." The man shrugged and pulled a plastic binder from a waterproof satchel slung over one shoulder. "Here's a copy of the signed fire mitigation agreement, the safety protocols, the fire department's operational map, and a temporary exemption form for HOA landscaping inspections, approved by your own secretary." "Our secretary is 82 years old and uses a typewriter from 1963, Linda snapped. She stamped it with a cat-shaped sticker. I figured it was official. She opened the binder, fumbling through laminated pages that outlined contingency planning, temperature thresholds, vegetation ignition points, and even snack arrangements for the fire crew. "Snack arrangements?" she muttered. He nodded. "Yeah. There's granola bars and juice boxes in the garage fridge. Help yourselves. Firefighter approved." The absurdity of it all was like a fog, thicker than the smoke. She squinted toward the backyard. A group of firefighters in full gear crouched behind the fence, aiming a drone-mounted nozzle at a wall of flame climbing up a tall hedge. But the hedge wasn't burning away. It was glowing, a freakish humming orange, but it wasn't turning to ash. She muttered, "What the hell is in those hedges?" "Bioengineered flame-retardant honeysuckle," the man said proudly. "Can withstand up to 2300 degrees for 20 minutes, and still bloom." Donnie, who had finally regained some mobility, shuffled up beside her, swiping soot from his glasses. "Linda, I think that bush just fought the fire and won." Linda said nothing. She was still trying to comprehend how they'd gone from checking grass length to watching Mother Nature wear a fireproof cape. The man flipped another page in the binder and tapped it with his pen. "And here's a clause showing the county designated this property as an educational demo site for residential fire defense landscaping. HOA oversight was waived for 72 hours. He looked at her, apologetic but firm. "I know this is a bit much, but honestly, you're witnessing the future of suburban safety. We've had 3 climate-induced wildfires within 15 miles of here in 2 years. This stuff could save entire neighborhoods. You showed up at the perfect time." Linda stared at the binder, then at the house, which was somehow both on fire and not on fire. Smoke drifted lazily through the air like a bored house guest. Somewhere behind them, a dog barked once, and then stopped, perhaps confused by the smell of both smoke and lemon-scented foam suppressant. She exhaled, shoulders sinking, the adrenaline finally ebbing from her limbs. Her eyes darted toward Cheryl, who was now crouched with a firefighter eating an oatmeal cookie. Donnie stood beside her, still squinting at the honeysuckle hedge like it might blink at him. She looked back at the man in orange shorts, binder, tucked under his arm, smiling like someone who genuinely believed he'd done something helpful today. And maybe, just maybe, he had. The backyard looked like a movie set for a post-apocalyptic survival show. Except everything was still, somehow, green. Controlled chaos didn't just describe the company logo stitched into the fire-retardant vests. It was the entire aesthetic of the scene unfolding around them. Linda stepped hesitantly through the side gate, boots crunching against a strange hybrid of gravel and gel-coated soil. She had to duck as a firefighter jogged past her, dragging a black hose over his shoulder. Another knelt behind a barricade of flame-resistant shrubs, aiming a misting nozzle at what appeared to be a perfectly healthy Japanese maple engulfed in flickering flames. And yet, the leaves weren't burning. They shimmered gold and red beneath the fire, more like stained glass than living foliage. "This is highly irregular," Linda muttered, raising her voice above the hiss of vapor and the low rumble of engines. Her words were aimed more at the universe than anyone specific. Highly, deeply irregular. Beside her, Donnie had finally recovered enough to start scribbling in a backup notepad he pulled from his pocket. His hand trembled slightly, but his pen scratched dutifully across the paper. "Linda, do we count this as a violation or a high-level achievement?" "Both," she snapped. But even as she said it, part of her brain was still trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The backyard was divided into color-coded zones, each one marked by small flags and neatly labeled metal placards. She moved past one that read Thermal-Resistant Flora, Batch 3X, and another tagged Ignition Control Zone, Phase B. Some of the plants were coated in what looked like a shiny, translucent gel. Others had been left completely bare, exposed to the heat. It wasn't just landscaping. It was science. In the center of the yard, a massive cylinder stood half buried in the ground, some sort of central sprinkler hub. A web of pipes extended outward like mechanical roots, feeding into an automated misting system. Every few minutes, a quiet psht noise hissed from somewhere unseen, followed by a light rain of citrus-scented foam that drifted down like snowflakes. It settled on the grass and shrubs without soaking them, leaving a delicate sheen behind. The Kwai, man from controlled chaos, his name tag now visible as Troy, caught up to them, grinning as he approached. His cheeks were streaked with ash, but he seemed entirely unbothered. "Pretty slick, huh?" he said, gesturing with an open arm. "We built this entire test setup in 3 days. 40% of the yard's vegetation is standard suburban flora. The rest is fire-resistant biotech. We've got honeysuckle, lavender, ornamental grasses, even dwarf palms, all genetically treated or enhanced with suppression agents." Linda squinted toward the back fence, where the flames had mostly receded into simmering heat trails. "Is that a rose bush on fire?" "Yep," Troy said proudly. "Hybrid Flame Guard roses. Those puppies are bred to endure direct contact with heat up to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Not only do they resist catching, they can actually redirect heat flow using water stored in specialized vascular tissues." Linda turned to Donnie, deadpan. "Roses are now fighting fire." Donnie nodded, tapping a note into his phone. "I'm adding that to the community newsletter. That's going under Emerging Technology Updates." Cheryl had reappeared from her floral bunker looking dazed but curious. She wandered over to a testing station set up on the patio. A folding table covered in temperature gauges, sample jars, plant tissue monitors, and a laptop that showed live data streams. 2 techs in green vests were monitoring readings and occasionally shouting numbers at a nearby firefighter. "Are those burn resistance graphs?" Cheryl asked, blinking. "Yep," Troy said, not missing a beat. "We're tracking plant temperature thresholds in real time. Once they spike past a certain point, the suppression system kicks in. Watch." As if on cue, a row of small ornamental hedges near the western fence began to glow orange. One of the techs hit a button, and a misting arc erupted from the ground, bathing the entire row in a fine spray. Within seconds, the glow dimmed, the flames subdued to nothing more than a few curling wisps of smoke. "Smart foam," Troy said. "It knows where the temperature hotspots are and reacts automatically. We've tied it into the yard's irrigation schedule. Low water use, high defense value." Linda stared at the scene, arms crossed, frowning as her mind processed the layers of design and redundancy. There were still things she didn't like: the unpredictability, the total lack of notice, the absurdity of walking into what looked like a botanical war zone. But she couldn't ignore the effectiveness. The house hadn't even been singed. The grass was intact. The plants looked frankly better than most of the neighborhood's normal lawns. Another firefighter jogged over and handed Troy a clipboard. Phase 3 suppression complete. 0 ignition on test bed D. Zone 7 ran hot, but stayed within tolerance. Perfect, Troy said, scribbling a note. We'll rerun Zone 4 at half intensity and then start teardown in 2 hours. The firefighter nodded and jogged off. Linda looked around. The noise was starting to quiet. The chaos was ebbing. Firefighters were retreating to the shade of the side yard, some removing helmets and pouring bottled water over their heads. A few of them had already started sharing stories and laughing quietly, completely at ease in what had earlier looked like Armageddon. And then she saw the gnome. It was tucked beneath a bush near the garden's edge. An ordinary ceramic lawn gnome, about 2 feet tall, holding a shovel in one hand and flashing a wide grin. But the paint was half melted, the surface scorched on one side. Still, it stood firm, defiant, like it had taken a fireball to the face and refused to yield. Linda stared at it, then back at the pristine, unburned siding of the house. Her voice came quieter this time, thoughtful. You really did fireproof? This yard, Troy nodded. Didn't do it alone. We had help. County fire planners, local engineers, even a few university researchers. But yeah, this is the safest lawn on the block right now, probably in the entire county. Cheryl gently picked up a scorched leaf from the ground and turned it over. It was brittle on one side but untouched on the other. This could actually change things. I mean, if this tech becomes affordable. Exactly, Troy said. It's not about flashy stunts. It's about resilience. We can't stop climate change from bringing fire closer to home, but we can build smarter homes and yards. Linda didn't answer. She just stared at the data charts, the misting, systems, the fireproof roses standing tall amid trails of smoke. Her HOA instincts battled her common sense. On one hand, this was a flagrant violation of community standards. On the other, it was a glimpse of the future. Unruly, yes, but brilliant in its own mad way. In the distance, the gnome gleamed under a fresh coating of safety foam, giving her a melted little wink. As the fire crews began their final checks and the last plumes of smoke dissipated into the late afternoon sky, the mood in the backyard shifted. What had begun as chaos was now a strange kind of calm, a quiet after the storm that wasn't really a storm at all. It had been, incredibly, a demonstration, an orchestrated performance of resilience in the face of the very thing suburban neighborhoods feared most: fire. Linda stood near the edge of the patio, arms crossed, her usually rigid stance softened by exhaustion and reluctant admiration. She hadn't moved for several minutes, content to observe the transformation. The yard, once a battlefield of flame and foam, now looked untouched, clean even. The grass gleamed with the faint shimmer of mist, the hedges stood tall and unbowed, and the fireproof roses remained in full bloom, their crimson petals brighter than ever beneath the setting sun. Troy approached quietly, his steps lighter now, his grin a little less cocky and a little more reflective. I know this wasn't how you expected today to go, he said. Linda glanced at him, a ghost of a smirk tugging at the edge of her mouth. Understatement of the year. I just want to say thank you for not shutting it down halfway through. You could have pulled rank, called the county, raised hell. She shrugged. I considered it. About 15 times. But then I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated risk. And maybe the smartest landscaping decision I've ever seen, in the weirdest possible way. He chuckled. That's high praise coming from you. It's not praise, she said quickly, but without bite. It's just acknowledgement. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the firefighters began packing up gear. A few of them waved toward Troy as they carried hoses back to the truck. Others offered nods to Linda and her team, some even flashing sheepish grins, like they were apologizing for the heart attack they'd nearly caused earlier. Donnie and Cheryl reappeared from around the side of the house, both holding cups of lemonade, liberated from the aforementioned garage fridge, no doubt. Donnie still had his notepad out, flipping through pages and scribbling observations. Cheryl had given up on formality entirely, having pulled her hair into a messy bun and taken off her HOA-issued windbreaker. "We found a binder in the garage labeled Apocalypse Garden Protocols," Cheryl announced as she sipped her drink. "It's part survival manual, part plant care guide. There's even a recipe in there for fire-resistant compost made from old coffee grounds and crushed eggshells." Linda raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me we've got gourmet fire mulch now?" "Apparently," Donnie chimed in. "Also, I think that gnome's got a built-in temperature gauge." "The gnome?" Linda turned, staring again at the singed but unbothered ceramic figure still standing vigil near the hedge line. "Yeah," Troy confirmed with a grin. "His hat changes color when it hits a certain temperature, turns red over 400 degrees. It's both a novelty and a functional early warning system." Linda shook her head slowly. "Of course it is." She looked around the yard once more. Every detail seemed deliberate now. The gel-treated mulch, the retractable sprinkler arms hidden within ornamental stones, the way the fire had been directed and then extinguished, as if the plants themselves were co-conspirators in their own protection. It was madness, but it was brilliant madness. "Let me be clear," she said at last, addressing both Troy and her team. "This was unannounced, unorthodox, and completely in violation of several HOA protocols. But," she took a breath, then continued, "it worked, I can't deny that. And maybe our protocols are outdated." Troy raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You thinking about writing new ones?" "I'm thinking," Linda said, "that maybe the HOA needs a resilience clause. Something that makes room for innovation, within reason. Something that protects the neighborhood not just from weeds and overgrown hedges, but from the future." "Wow," Donnie whispered. "That's actually progressive." Cheryl leaned over and whispered louder, "Is she okay?" Linda rolled her eyes, but didn't refute it. "Don't get used to it." Troy stepped closer, extending a hand. "Well, if you ever need help drafting that clause, you know where to find me. Controlled Chaos is planning to expand. Next step's a full-scale model neighborhood with integrated climate defense systems. Might even get state funding." Linda hesitated, then shook his hand. "If you do, let me know. I'd love to see it. From a safe, flame-retardant distance." As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden light across the still glittering backyard, Linda gathered her clipboard, what was left of it, and motioned for her team to follow. They walked in a loose line toward the front, stepping over the cooling remnants of what had once been a 3-alarm heart attack and was now just a very impressive lawn. At the sidewalk, she paused and turned back for one last look. The house sat perfectly normal, almost boring now, nestled between its more traditional neighbors. You'd never guess what had happened here unless you were told. No scorch marks, no debris, just a backyard that had stared fire in the face and won. "I have to admit," she muttered, mostly to herself, "this might be the first HOA inspection that ends with me revising the handbook instead of issuing citations." From behind her, Cheryl piped up, "Can we put the gnome on the cover?" Donnie nodded enthusiastically. "With sunglasses and..." Flames in the background, Linda chuckled despite herself. "We'll see." Then, with one last glance at the fireproof roses swaying gently in the breeze, she turned and led the team back to the car. The HOA might have come looking for violations, but what they'd found instead was a new standard, a blueprint for safety, for resilience, and for the strange, unexpected beauty of change. And behind them, in the cooling yard, the gnome watched in silent approval, hat already fading back to blue.